Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Saturday, we mark 8 years since 72 people lost their lives in the Grenfell Tower fire. 8 years of fighting for truth, 8 years without justice, and 8 years of too often glacial change. This will be the last anniversary before the tower starts to come down. It will no longer stand as that painful symbol of injustice, greed, and impunity on the West London skyline. And as the tower starts to be deconstructed, it is even more important that in this House we remember the 72 people who lost their lives. And I'm sure this House will continue to stand united with their families, with the survivors, and with the community until justice is served and systematic change is implemented.
I thank my honourable friend for making a powerful opener on this really important and tragic anniversary that's coming before us, 8 years. And of the 72 people, 18 children lost their lives. Of the 72 people, 37 were disabled and 15 of them died. Does my honourable friend agree that even though the tower will come down in a few years, the trauma, the suffering, the pain and anguish will live with the people of Grenfell for many years to come?
I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for her intervention, and I completely agree, and the legacy must be the systemic change that I talked about. Many of the people who lost their lives in Grenfell were disabled, so I welcome the Government's commitment to laying regulations that will mandate personal emergency evacuation plans for disabled people. It's a crucial step forward. I know the Minister has recently taken fire safety into his brief, and we'll look at this closely in terms of the resources to make sure that those are actually implemented and available for disabled people. Okay, fine. Yeah.
Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for Kensington and Bayswater for bringing this forward. It is appropriate and right that this House should recall those tragic times back on June the 14th in 2017 and pay tribute to all of those 72 innocent lives that were lost. I think the House is united in stating that and thinking of those families. And I know it might be 2017, those memories linger long for the families who lost loved ones. Madam Deputy Speaker, the CPS have indicated that decisions regarding potential charges will not be expected until late 2026, which will be almost a decade from when it first happened. So does the Honourable Member not agree that more efforts must be made to expedite the process to ensure that family and friends have justice and that the closure they need to grieve and move on with their lives actually happens?
Thank the Honourable Member for expressing his solidarity, and indeed he's right. The public inquiry that reported in September was devastating in its finding that the simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable. Now, I know we must respect the criminal investigation and we must avoid saying anything that jeopardises that process. But on behalf of our community, I simply say to our government that until there is criminal accountability for those responsible, there will be no justice.
My honourable friend gives way at that point. I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I'd like to send my condolences to the family, friends and the loved ones of all those that lost their lives 8 years ago. But does my honourable friend agree with me that if justice is to be delivered, then the government needs to think very, very carefully about delivering on Hillsborough law and candour, duty of candour?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. I absolutely agree. I applaud the Prime Minister's personal commitment to bring in the Hillsborough law. It was at the party conference in September last year when he said that the law is for the sub-postmasters in the Horizon scandal, the victims of infected blood, Windrush, Grenfell Tower, and all the countless injustices over the years suffered by working people at the hands of those who are supposed to serve them. That's the Prime Minister's words, and I agree that we should see that law introduced before we return to Liverpool later this year, and to see it accompanied by a national oversight mechanism so that victims can be independently reassured that inquiry recommendations actually deliver that meaningful change. Because the sad truth is, we know that if the lessons from Lakanal House, the fire in 2009, had been learned, as the coroner intended, it is very likely the Grenfell tragedy could have been prevented. So we cannot allow that to happen again. Madam Deputy Speaker, for the community of North Kensington, Grenfell will always be in our hearts, and I welcome the hard work of the Grenfell Memorial Commission to select a fitting permanent tribute to the memory of the 72. But our community needs continued support today. I thank the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister for Building Safety, the Mayor of London and many other elected officials for their regular visits to North Kensington and their engagement with the community. They will know that as the tower is brought down, it is vital that community health services, including mental health services, are maintained, and I hope our local NHS leadership, working with the government, can make sure that those services remain at least for the period of deconstruction. It's also essential that survivors have the monitoring they need to spot and address long-term health conditions that may arise. But for the residents around the tower, change has also been too long in coming. I meet regularly with the residents of the Lancaster West Estate, the Silchester Estate, and many others. On the Lancaster West Estate, there is now the prospect of an £85 million gap in the budget to complete the major works that were promised by local and central government after the fire. Clearly, no project of this scale should be overrunning so dramatically, but that promise to residents must be kept. So I call on the Minister to do all he can, working with RBKC to find a solution. But the challenge is much wider than Lancaster West. I've dealt with thousands of housing cases since being elected, relating to poor quality repairs, damp and mould, and a culture of disrespect, especially for social housing tenants.
I'd like to firstly thank you thank the Honourable Member for bringing this debate. And 8 years on, we remember the deep sorrow and stam of survivors and families. And on the point you were talking about, Grenfell really did expose failures in building safety and massive social inequality. At the time, I was a teacher, and the deaths of those children were tragic. But now, as an MP, I think it is upon us to do all we can in this place to not only find those people social justice and the justice they deserve, but to make sure it does not happen again.
Thank my honourable friend for that intervention. And I do applaud the many steps the government is taking on this issue. For example, on professionalising the housing sector, on implementing Awab's law on damp and mould, because the truth is, as she states, that all of us in this House know a tragic case like Awab Ishaq could easily happen again without real change. And in my constituency, that means RBKC, Notting Hill Genesis, Peabody, Octavia and others whose purpose should be to serve their residents, but too often end up making their lives a misery. And we've launched a local campaign on safe and healthy homes to try and address the systemic failure in the community around Grenfell. Madam Deputy Speaker, there will also be no justice until the painfully slow process of remediating unsafe buildings across the country is complete.
Thank you for giving way and for securing this debate. Last week, the residents of over 40 flats in Barbourne Works, Worcester, were suddenly evicted after an inspection of unremediated cladding found such severe fire hazards that an immediate prohibition notice was issued. How this was able to happen is a question that must be answered. But in the meantime, does my honourable friend agree with me that the building managers, in this case First Port, must put residents first and must not be allowed to let legal disputes or the allocation of blame slow down the urgent work of making the building safe and allowing residents to return home?
Thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I agree it is staggering to me that hundreds of thousands of people are still living in buildings like the one he describes with major fire defects. Members from across this House, up and down the country, will have constituents affected, people trapped in unsellable properties, leaseholders on the hook for non-cladding defects, and social housing providers sinking funds into remediation that could be spent on building the desperately needed new social homes our country needs.
Thank my honourable friend and neighbour for securing this debate. and for realising from the first day he was elected that he's not only the member for Kensington and Bayswater but the member for Grenfell. It's good that the government is implementing all 58 recommendations of phase 2 of the inquiry. But does he agree with me that the 4-year timetable of that is a long time to wait on top of the 8 years that have already passed?
Thank my honourable friend for that very valid point. It is good news that the government have accepted all of Sir Martin Morvick's recommendations, and I applaud them for taking time to come back in detail rather than rushing a response. But it is absolutely vital that we see timelines kept to, and I think the example of the slow pace of change on remediation is a warning to us all that this has to be gripped from the centre if we want to see that systemic change happening. And to give another example, in my constituency, shared ownership leaseholders at Shaftesbury Place, a property managed by Notting Hill Genesis, saw their building insurance soar by over 2,000% after a fire safety inspection. That was £5,000 a year increase in individual service charges. Now, those residents contest the report and the recommendations, and I hope Notting Hill Genesis will work out a reasonable solution. But that is an example of what has to be fixed. The building insurance market, as we had to do with flooding, may require government intervention. But I know the Minister agrees that we have to quicken the pace of remediation. And I would urge him to consider what more the government can do to underwrite the major works now so that people don't have to wait. And I think the best example of that would be to widen access to the Building Safety Fund, to social housing providers, so that they can put more capital into maintaining the condition of their current homes and building new homes. I know the government is also very focused on giving the building safety regulator the resources it needs so that we rightly enforce higher standards post-Grenfell, but that we also accelerate house building and avoid unnecessary delays.
Can you on that point?
I will be.
Thank you for giving way, and I thank him for securing time for this debate. And I do hope that we continue to debate this in years to come. And I hope that we start to talk about the positives that have come out of this in terms of the recommendations, the lives it saves and changes. So 8 years on, in Scotland, you might be surprised I'm going to talk about, there's 5,500 properties affected by flammable cladding. 25,000 people live in them. And I sense my honourable friend's sense of frustration about the pace of remediation in England, and in particular in his own constituency. In Scotland, after 8 years, just one building has been remediated. Hopefully in England it's faster than that.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for sharing those statistics, and I think the reality is the money is there. What we need to do is go building by building and solve the problems, and I think that's where I welcome the government's emphasis on devolving some of the decision-making, for example, to a London remediation board, and that might be something to look at for other parts of the country. I'm sure the House would also appreciate an update on the Prime Minister's welcome commitment on September 4th that all the companies found by the inquiry to have been part of these horrific failings will stop being awarded government contracts. As the inquiry said, the companies that made the cladding and insulation products, Arconic, Celotex and Kingspan, behaved with systematic dishonesty and engaged in deliberate and sustained strategies to manipulate the testing processes, misrepresent test data and mislead the market.
One of the other glaring I remember from the inquiry was around the mention of corporate greed from some of the developers, and I think it is right that my own friends mentioned that the government will be looking at banning those contracts. Another thing that many of the survivors have asked for is around prosecutions to come forward. Does my own friend agree that in addition to the government banning those companies from receiving additional contracts, there should be additional funding to the Met Police to swiftly bring justice to those that were responsible for this?
Thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I know it's one of the biggest teams that the Met Police have under operation, and of course it's right that they keep the funding in place until it comes to fruition. And I agree with her that we must make sure that taxpayer money is no longer going to those companies, and I hope that the Minister can give us some reassurance on that timeline. And I also hope the Minister can give that reassurances that under the new system of construction product regulation, the same mistakes will not be made again. Madam Deputy Speaker, real change is hard. I've always believed, as Martin Luther King said, that while the arc of the moral universe is long, it bends towards justice. And for that, we need to act now in a way that will protect people in the future. So, as I mentioned earlier, the introduction of the Hillsborough Law, a national oversight mechanism, and the government's own reporting on inquiry recommendations and how they're being implemented will all give reassurance to people that this cannot happen again. Madam Deputy Speaker, Grenfell was the most devastating residential fire since World War II, and the pain can never be erased. But I want to give the final word to one of the young people in our community who give me hope. Noha Shentouf is 16 and is the new youth mayor for Kensington and Chelsea. I attended an event with her and other young leaders at Tate Britain last night, and these were part of her words. They trimmed the budget, not the risk, then signed its safety with the flick of a wrist. But it was fine, they saved a few grand. Who needs an alarm when profit was the main plan? We're supposed to give our trust to people who don't care about our well-being, no matter how many complaints they're going to fail seeing. Exactly what the residents were foreseeing. And they sit in a meeting full of complaints, but they're disagreeing, ending in disaster with many fleeing. But 72 couldn't make it being alive. A life lost is a light lost, but that doesn't mean the fight's lost.
Minister Alex Norris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Kensington and Bayswater, for securing this opportunity to mark this weekend's 8th anniversary of the tragedy at Grenfell Tower and the loss of 72 innocent lives, 18 of them, as we've heard, who were children. Time has not diminished the horror, the pain or the impact of that day. The lives of families and a community changed forever. And the Honourable Gentleman has raised an awful lot of important points, and I hope I shall be able to cover all of them, but they're in keeping, Madam Deputy Speaker, with his outstanding advocacy for his community. In the building safety space, there is no member I speak to more than him. We'll be together again tomorrow, and he pushes and presses me quite rightly in the interest of his community day in, day out, and I want to recognise that on the record today. But I think the most important tribute, Madam Deputy Speaker, is to the community as well, because it has been 8 long years, and they've campaigned and fought, as we've heard, for truth, for justice and for change. The Deputy Prime Minister and I are resolute in our listening to them and to ensuring that the bereaved, the survivors, the next of kin and resident voices are heard and heard at the heart of government. And we will continue to work until the lessons from the Grenfell Tower fire have changed the system that led to that tragedy. I will give way.
I thank the Minister and I thank him for attending our Select Committee on behalf of the government to give his update on this. One of the things we heard at the Select Committee from Grenfell United and survivors was around the fact that for far too long, social housing tenants were being ignored, dismissed. There isn't any recommendation or terms of reference in inquiry looking at race or discrimination, but does he agree with me that that was a contributing factor in the tenants being failed in terms of the discrimination that disabled and BME residents faced?
It has always been clear to me in my conversations with bereaved and survivors, with families and next of kin, you know, the demographics, both in terms of race, are to speak their own story. Similarly with the tell around disability as well. That's why it's informed our policy in PEEPS, which I will talk to shortly, but also our entire agenda around residents' voice in social housing, which I again will turn to in a couple of minutes. I just wanted to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I was here, like my honourable friend from Vauxhall and Camberwell Green, in the very early stages of our time as members of Parliament in 2017. And as I've said in every debate of this kind whilst Minister, if we had said, and I remember I know exactly where I was sat during those discussions, I can see it, but 10 metres from here, if we'd said to ourselves then that in 8 years we'd have achieved as little as we had, I think we would have thought that a significant failure, and it is a significant failure, and I want those watching the debate to know that we understand that. My honourable friend said the progress is glacial, and I think that's exactly right, and it behoves us to change that with real intent, and that's my commitment, that's the Deputy Prime Minister's commitment. Last September, as we've heard, Sir Martin Moore-Bick published the inquiry's final report. Again, this is a hugely important staging post and driver for action. And those findings were clear. The system failed at every point, public, private, local, national. Families were failed, resident voices were ignored, dishonest practices were propagated. The Prime Minister has apologised on behalf of the British state for its part of the failures that led to entirely avoidable deaths. And I want to repeat the Prime Minister's words: it should never have happened. And in terms of our response to that inquiry, we published that in February. As colleagues have said, we accepted the findings and committed to deliver on all 58 recommendations and to go further through a broader approach to reform, including with regards to construction products. Last month, we published our progress report on delivery, and we will continue to report on a quarterly basis. The next progress report, this will be a very big one in September, because we'll also publish our full implementation plan, settling out how we will deliver the recommendations. And I agree with my honourable friend, the legacy must be system change. And again, I agree with my honourable friend, the member for Hammersmith, that it is a long time, and I know, having spoken to bereaved and survivors, that they are frustrated that some of these recommendations will take time. And the commitment I would make from this dispatch box, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that nothing will take a day longer than it has to take, and that we're working with urgency, we're working with intent, and we will be very transparent as we do.
I am thankful to the Minister, and I appreciate that he's working round the clock on this, and this is very important to him in terms of the big challenge he has in his portfolio. Does the Minister agree, though, that because there are so many competing demands on MHCLG, including looking at the issue around building safety, including his new responsibility on fire safety, one of the clear ways to make sure that the government continues to keep focus on this is with a national mechanism, oversight mechanism, which will help the government in terms of making sure that there's clear deadlines and timeframes for those recommendations, which the government have rightly accepted?
I'm very grateful for that. The Honourable Lady preempts my next point. I just wanted to recognise, before I move on, the point from the member for Edinburgh South West, that when he said that he hopes we will have these opportunities to debate it. We've committed to an annual such debate in this place about our progress, and we'll do so until we've delivered. But turning to oversight, because we are committed to transparency, accountability and scrutiny, it is entirely right that the community, having been failed in the ways they have, want to see very clear accountability. We will record all recommendations made by public inquiries on gov.uk by next summer, backdating it to 2024, so there will be that public tracking of inquiry recommendations, which meets the commitment under the Grenfell Tower Inquiry review. We do know, and I will refer, the Honourable Lady knows I'll refer to the points I made at her Select Committee, that the Cabinet Office, as part of its ongoing inquiry work, is exploring how to improve scrutiny and accountability for all inquiry responses so that actions can be taken more quickly, and I wouldn't want to run ahead of that. And to address the point from my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool Riverside, that we remain fully committed to Hillsborough law, which will include a legal duty of candour for public servants and criminal sanctions for those who refuse to comply. But the justice piece, as my honourable friend, the member for Strangford, and the honourable member for Kensington and Bayswater himself talk with real power on, I am conscious that when I talk to bereaved survivors about whatever the matter of the day is, they always say to me, "Yes, Alex, but that's not justice yet." And I know that, and the Prime Minister acknowledged last year that the inquiry final report, while exposing the truth, does not yet bring the justice that families rightly deserve. And I'm again aware of the frustration in this area and that strong feeling that accountability is yet to be achieved. We continue to support the Independent Metropolitan Police Service as they conduct their investigations. We will continue to do that. We know how important it is. I want to touch on the tower itself. As the Honourable Gentleman says, this will be a very poignant anniversary, because it will be the one where it's the tower for the final time is as it is. And we will continue to work closely with bereaved families, with survivors, next of kin and residents as we prepare work to carefully take down Grenfell Tower starting in the autumn. They will remain at the heart of this work. And as we look to the future, we are committed to supporting the Independent Memorial Commission in their important work to create a fitting and lasting memorial determined by the community. And the Deputy Prime Minister and I will continue, as we have throughout, to meet with anyone who wants to listen and to act on the issues that we're raising, but more importantly, that they raise with us. And that I know there is a lot of anxiety that as the tower is carefully taken down, that will be a forgotten moment then for the Grenfell community. And again, I want to give that assurance. I know with these colleagues behind me that will never be the case, but for us as a government it won't be either. But this becomes, as my honourable friend, the member for Vauxhall and Camberwell Green said, this is a moment of trauma for individuals. It is crucial, as my honourable friend says, that really good mental health support is available for the community. I am raising this, as is my honourable friend from West Lancashire in the Ministry for Health and Social Care, with the Integrated Care Board, to make sure that the right mental health services are there, to make sure that the right screening facilities are there, to make sure there's the right screening for children and young people, which is such a community priority as well. And I will work with him in that venture to make sure those healthcare services are there. It is clear and accepted that the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea also failed. The leadership has committed to change and has taken important steps forward, but we still hear from too many residents that they're not getting the experience that they should. The Deputy Prime Minister and I have met with the Leader of the Council, and we've challenged them to become an exemplar council as a fitting legacy for this tragedy, and we will continue to hold them to account until residents feel and see the change. My honourable friend mentions the Lancaster West estate, and I'm conscious that residents there, before even that terrible night in 2017, have lived on a building site for a very, very long time. They say that to me every time that I see them. The council has a huge gap in funding, as my honourable gentleman says. He says 85 million, I will say 84 million, but it is a very significant gap either way. I will continue to work with him, with the Residents' Association, because I know their able chair, Mushtaq Lashari, will press us at every opportunity, as he always does, quite rightly on this, and with the council themselves on how to take this issue forwards. The honourable gentleman mentioned PEEPs. That has recently become a responsibility of mine and of MHCLG. We're looking to lay, as he says, secondary legislation as soon as we can do. I'm committed to working with disability groups to make sure that the guidance and the toolkit in its implementation is as good as possible. And we've committed funding this year, and of course any future funding will be part of the spending review process, which is coming to its peroration tomorrow. I agree with his points on the pace of remediation. I inherited a trajectory that took us into the 2040s. Our remediation acceleration plan, certainly with buildings above 18 metres with unsafe cladding in a government scheme, concertinas that to 2029, and we'll be updating our remediation acceleration plan this summer to push even further on what we can do to get quicker remediation. And he mentions social housing and the challenges around social housing and the impact that has not just on remediation but on building, and those points are very well made, and I'll say that we'll announce our longer term plans in that space shortly. I'll give way.
Very, very briefly, I do thank the Minister for being generous. One of the issues that's been constantly raised by RSL providers is the fact that they're not able to apply for the building safety remediation. Is this something that we will be seeing an update in recent weeks and maybe in announcements tomorrow?
On the point of fact, they can access the Building Safety Fund and Cladding Safety Scheme, but I have heard from them that the circumstances that they do that, which is basically declaring a degree of financial distress, is very difficult for them to do, and I understand that. Her suggestion, I think, has a lot of merit in it. I couldn't be drawn ahead of any events that are coming, but all I'll say is I think the suggestion has an awful lot of merit in it. I will very, very quickly.
I just wanted to recognise that so many leaseholders in my Liverpool Riverside constituency have been affected by the delay in remediation. Their lives are on hold because they can't sell their flats and they can't move food. So we need to look at what we can do to try and support these leaseholders going forward.
No, I totally agree, and those trapped are living under intolerable circumstances, and we, as part of the update to the remediation acceleration plan, will have more about what we can do to provide them with relief. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, this has been a hugely important debate. We will have many more, and we will work our hardest to deliver justice for the community as quickly as we possibly can.